A couple of weeks ago, I preached a sermon entitled Stood on the Shoulders of Giants. And I suppose this will be a kind of a tie-in back to that. You'll see some overlap. Because when we think about standing on the shoulders of giants, and we talked about the various ones, and we made it a little bit more generic as far as people that we've known and appreciated over the years and the strength that we gained from them. But when you begin to really think about profiles in courage, I'm reminded of, first of all, of a book in a secular nature. It was a book that was written by President Kennedy, and it was entitled Profiles in Courage. And I guess it was written as his precursor for his run for president in 1960. It seems like anybody who's going to run for president writes a book about 2 or 3 years before they decide to make the run for it. And so if you see individuals coming out with a book that are a political mind, you know that they're probably lining up for their party's nomination. One of which I noticed recently was Nikki Haley is going to be publishing a book, and I've long thought that she would run for president. And I told Linda the other day, if she runs, she'll probably ask me to serve in her cabinet. And Linda looked at me and she goes, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, she'll remember me." When we were in South Carolina and I was doing the counseling for the Hurricane Katrina people, and I was in a meeting. I didn't know who was in the meeting. And I just said, "You guys are idiots. You don't know what you're doing." And she happened to be one of the ones in there along with then Governor John Sanford. And I'm sure I endured myself to all those political types in South Carolina. And they're probably standing at the border waving goodbye as I cross the line. But anyways, I admire a lot of people. And I appreciated the book, Profiles in Courage. I was really young when I read it for the first time. And I've gone back and read it over and over again. But if you look back at the book of Ezekiel, and if you go into the second chapter, and you drop down into verse 3, you find the following being presented. Then he said to me, Ezekiel 2 and verse 3, "Son of man, I am sending you to the sons of Israel, to a rebellious people who have rebelled against me. They and their fathers have transgressed against me to this very day. And I am sending you to them who are stubborn and obstinate children. And you shall say to them, Thus says the Lord God. As for them, whether they listen or not, for they are a rebellious house, for they will know that a prophet has been among them. And you, son of man, neither fear them, nor fear their words, though thistles and thorns are with you, and you sit on scorpions. Neither fear their words, nor be dismayed at their presence, for they are a rebellious house." Now, verse 7. "But you shall speak my words to them, whether they listen or not, for they are rebellious." Well, basically what God is telling Ezekiel is, I want you to rise up. I want you to embrace the fact of what you're going to have to tell them. And I want you to know that it's not going to be pleasant, that it's going to be difficult. The description of the thorns and thistles and sitting on scorpions, yikes. It conjures up in our minds a rather interesting scenario. But what he's really asking Ezekiel to be is, I want you to be a man of courage. And the word courage is defined in the Hebrew as being to be strong, to be constant, to be bold. But what's interesting in the Greek, one of the definitions is to be of good cheer. And you sit back and you go, wait a minute. How is courage, in our understanding of it, meaning to be of good cheer? The other definition, confident boldness. So I blend those all together. And I go, now I understand. I understand about Paul's courage and the boldness with which he spoke. I understand now about Ezekiel, even though the Hebraic word doesn't convey that idea of good cheer. Because as you stand And as you make a stand and you realize your courage is there, you can live with yourself regardless of the outcome. But if you do not take a stand, if you do not speak up, how can you live with yourself? How can you face yourself in the mirror? That I know something's going on that's wrong, yet I don't speak out against it. And the reason I don't speak out is for fear. I lack the courage. I lack the fortitude. God challenges us as his children to be people of courage, to be people of principle, to have a sense of boldness about us. The quality or state of mind enabling one to face danger or hardship with confidence and resolution. That's what courage is. That's what we want. We want to embrace this. Turn over to the book of Proverbs. In Proverbs, we're going to go to the 28th chapter. And in the 28th chapter, we're going to focus on the very first verse. Proverbs 28, verse 1. The wicked flee when no one is pursuing, but the righteous hold as a lion. Righteousness. Righteousness is equated with courage. And it does take courage to be an individual who is righteous. We long for that. We desire it. The scriptures in Revelation 21 and verse 8 point out that if one is lacking courage, entrance into the heavenly city is going to be denied them. That part of entrance in is courage. And we long for that courage. We long for that spiritual backbone. Because that's exactly what God would have us and want us to do. Now, we've talked in times past about those individuals back in the book of Proverbs. And in Proverbs, we've looked at, we've looked at them as profiles in courage. We're not going to take the time to go back and redress all of that. But as we just read in Proverbs 28, verse 1, it does demand courage. The other day, Linda and I were over helping Joy to try to get her garage door open. And for whatever reason, it was stuck on the right-hand side. And I went over there and I was looking at it and I was trying to get it loose. And I said, it's stuck here. Let me just push this little button. And there was a button that was caught on one of the wheels. And even after I pushed that, it still wouldn't come up right. And so Linda's standing back and she goes, maybe if we just moved it, just see if we could pull it a little bit to the left. And all of a sudden it popped up. And I turned and looked. And Shira was there in the middle of the door. And Shira had pulled it up and boom, it went up. Her new nickname is not Joy, but it is Shira. Her of mighty strength, because she moved it just enough so that now it slides in and up and down. But we won't go into all the whys and wherefores more about her garage door. But when we talk about heroes, we tend to think in terms of comic book heroes or larger than life heroes. Well, people don't have to be larger than life to be a hero. Because when you look at the scriptures, the profiles in courage are indeed those individuals that we can relate to, that are common. Remember a few weeks ago we talked about Hebrews 12 and verse 1. Now, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of the faith. We have courage because of Christ. We have courage because of what he did for us. That throughout the book of Hebrews, the author talks about how Jesus blazed a trail for us. That he was the one who went to the cross for us. He's the one who entered into the holiest of holies for us. He's the one that allows us entrance into a relationship with God. But see, all these things we touched on. But now we come back and we begin to look a little bit closer. And as you look a little bit closer there in the 11th chapter, you go down into verse 32. For what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell of Gideon. Well, what about Gideon? What about Barak? What about Samson? Samson, you go, was he a man of courage? And I think at the end he was. Oh, he was mighty in war, had strength unbelievable, but he was truly a weak individual. He gave in to his desires of women on more than one occasion. But ultimately, even after his eyes had been gouged out, he showed his true character. His hair had begun to grow back, as had his beard. He stands in the edifice. His hands reach out to the pillars. He prays to God, dear God, please remember me. I think it is at that moment that he repents of his sins. Dan just talked about, as we surrounded the table, of the necessity to repent. Here is a man who is shackled, who's been humiliated, who's been blinded, who's enslaved, and asks for the courage to do what he needs to do in order to be the victor. What a tremendous statement. It took courage for him to appeal to God. God, I know I'm not where I should be with you. He was one of the judges of Israel. And he had fallen far from God. And he cries out now, please remember me. And he ultimately has the victory. It cost him his life, yes. But he has the victory. That took courage. That took raw, omnipotent courage. And I think the greatest courage it took was to repent of his sins. To stand before God in the presence of all and let it be known that he thought God had forgotten him and he needed to get back to a right relationship with him. We're not going to go back and talk about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We all know that story. We're not going to talk about Daniel either. Daniel in the lion's den, even though there was a political trap set up to get him. He goes, no, I got to keep doing what I do. But think about Esther. Oh, Esther was exquisite. You look at the book of Esther and you come away just so appreciating her character and the fact that, well, she made a rather interesting statement in Esther, the 4th chapter, in verse 8, and then in verse 16, where she's called upon to show her mettle and courage. And basically what she says is, if I perish, I perish. What she did saved the entirety of the nation. It brought about what the Jews still celebrate to this day, the Feast of Purim, to remember her courage and her valor. It's interesting that she is in the line of David that would lead to the coming of the Christ. You read that book and you come away just so impressed with her courage. You go into the book of Numbers in the 13th chapter. Look at Joshua and Caleb, men of courage. And need I say that I'm convinced of these two men, They came back after the other 10 spies said, "Oh no, we can't take the land. No, no, no. It's full of giants." Joshua and Caleb must have been Dodger fans because they go, "We ain't scared of no giants." Hello, Caleb. Oh, but in all seriousness, courage. We're not afraid. We're not afraid at all. And they put their lives on the line. Now you just sit back and you ask yourself, do you even have of the courage as they did? Just a tiny bit. Then you go into the New Testament. And again, some we talked about a few weeks ago. We talked about the man born blind. And as you look through the 9th chapter of John, his metamorphosis is clearly on display. So let's go over to John 9. Because a few weeks ago, we just made passing reference to him. But now let's go back and appreciate him a little bit closer. So in John 9, look at verse 8. By this time, Jesus had already applied the clay to his eyes, told him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. The man comes back, he's seen. The neighbors, therefore, in John, the 9th chapter and verse 8, the neighbors, therefore, and those who previously saw him as a beggar were saying, "Is not this the one who sits and begs?" And others were saying, "This is he." Still others were, no. But he is like him. But he kept saying, "No, I'm the one. It's me. It really is." Verse 10. Therefore they were saying to him, "How then were your eyes open?" He answered, "The man who is called Jesus made clay, anointed my eyes, said to me, 'Go to Siloam, wash.' So I went away and washed, and I received sight." And they said to him, "Where is he?" His response, "I don't know. I don't know." Look at verse 22. Verse 21 sets it up. The Jews had said, the Pharisees had said that whoever acknowledged Jesus as the Christ would be put out of the temple. Now you have to understand how important this was to the blind man. His licensure, if you would, for his begging and his livelihood was tied in to the Pharisees giving him, granting him permission to beg at the entrance of the temple. So if he's going to be put out of the synagogue, in essence, he's being put out of society. So now for him to make an attestation as to who Jesus is tantamount to him cutting off his sole source of income. His parents are aware of this. His parents are called before the Pharisees and asked the question. His parents in verse 20. His parents answered them and said, "We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But how he now sees, we do not know. Or who opened his eyes, we do not know. Ask him. He is of age. He'll speak for himself." Now, the parents are showing lack of courage. They're terrified. Verse 22 explains that. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess him to be the Christ, he should be put out of the synagogue. For this reason, they said, "He is of age, ask him." Verse 24. If you read in verse 24 and following, what you find is a man of courage. He stands before the Pharisees. And what he does is remarkable. Watch as it plays out. Look at verse 27. Well, actually, look at verse 25. Whether he's a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that whereas I was blind, now I see. What did he do to you? Verse 26. Verse 27, I told you already, and you did not listen. Why? Do you want to hear it again? You do not want to become one of his disciples too, do you? That's throwing it back in their face. Hey, I've told you. I get it. You want to become one of his disciples as well, don't you? But if you continue on reading, he challenges them even more. He said, look, God doesn't hear the prayers of sinners. If this man were a sinner, he could do none of the things of which he's done. He knows, as this goes on deeper and deeper, he knows what's going to happen. But he does not back down. This man had true courage, absolute courage. The one we refer to as doubting Thomas, courage. In John the 11th chapter, he's willing to go back into the region of Judea in order that he would die with Christ. The others, maybe not so much. But they were talking with reference to their friend Lazarus. And Thomas says, hey, I'm willing to go back. I'm willing to die with you. I'm willing. That's courage. And it was courage on the part of Thomas to say, you know what? I want some proof. Peter, I know you're impetuous. And I'm a twin. I'm a twin. And people mistake me for my brother all the time, more than likely. In the newspaper this morning, the sports column, the San Francisco Giants have a relief pitcher. And I said that under my breath because I'm not allowed to say bad words. Boy, that went over. Anyways, they have a relief pitcher. And he has an exact duplicate of it, his brother. And his brother was sitting in the stands the other night when he came into the stand, into pitch. And the people are looking around going, hey, how come wait a minute. You're out there pitching, but you're sitting here. How can that be? Well, I'm a doppelganger, if you would. I'm a twin. I'm an identical twin. You don't think that Thomas wasn't mistaken for his twin? And so when he asked, I want some proof, I don't blame him. And that took courage. That took courage. And then when he is presented with the proof, he is quick to acknowledge it. My Lord and my God. The apostles. The book of Acts is filled with it. Stephen. What a man. Courage. The first martyr for the cause of Christ that we have record of. And he knew what was going to happen to him. He knew it. And then, of course, Paul. Look at what he went through. But all of these are examples of a profile of courage. So now, take the time to look inside yourself. Examine yourself. We know very clearly that the Old Testament was written for our instructions. We know that. And so we look at ourselves and we ask, have we risen to the point where we have the courage? Have we? Do we have the courage and the resolve and the conviction to refuse temptation? Dan made reference to 1 Corinthians 10 a little while ago. And down at verse 13, when we were talking about the brother in Christ who prayed for punishment. Look at verse 13 of 1 Corinthians 10. The following is found. No temptation has overtaken you, but such is common to man. And God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide you the way of escape also, that you may be able to endure it. We're all tempted. Each and every day, all of us are tempted, but in different ways. We're tempted. I shared with Linda and Adam yesterday a temptation that was put before me. And I will not say exactly I will tell you what the temptation was, but I won't tell you what deterred me from it. The temptation was I had to go to the store and get pickle relish, just pickle relish. Before I left the house, I got a freezer bag. You know, the kind you're about yay big and I grabbed the big one and went, no. So I put it down and grabbed the littler one. And as I walked out the garage, they all go, oh, you're going to get ice cream. You're going to get pickle relish, then you're going to get ice cream. And Linda said, well, while you're getting the ice cream, get fabric softener. So I'm in the store and I get the fabric softener and pickle relish. And yes, I got ice cream. But as I was walking by the cookie aisle, I thought, man, what good with ice cream? But cookies. Oh, cookies. And something deterred me from that temptation. And I came home and I told Linda and Adam, and they go, well, good for you. Because I love cookies. I'm getting like Curtis. I remember Curtis liking cookies. Oatmeal raisin ones, to be exact. Would that I would eat healthy cookies. But we're all tempted each and every day by different things. But if we are people of courage, we can rise above those temptations. There is always a way. Now, I'm not equating 1 Corinthians 10:13 with me yesterday as far as, a big temptation or eating cookies or not is a sin. That's not what I'm saying. But you know the principle. You know what's involved. And that we are tempted and we can rise above it. Hebrews, the 4th chapter, and verse 15. Jesus was tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin. He left us an example to follow. So do we have that resolve and boldness? Do we have the courage to reject the crowd? Do we have that courage? You go back into the book of Exodus, the 23rd chapter, and you look at verse 2, and you find about individuals of the masses of the people going one way and the courage it would take to stand against them. Romans, the 12th chapter, verses 1 and 2. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what the will of God is. See, we can be people of courage. We, by our lives, can reflect a profile in courage. And we do not become envious of evil people. That's not part of who we are. But we rise above it. It takes courage to be a nonconformist. One of the reasons I like young Caleb is that he lives in Southern California and he still has allegiance to those sports teams he liked from Northern California. I may not agree with him, but I appreciate that he walks to his own drummer. I do. And that's a small thing. But now look at it in the grander scope of life. As a Christian, you go through life, you need to be unapologetic. You don't need to say, well, I'm sorry, I'm a Christian. And I hear that over and over again. I'm sorry, I can't do that. I'm a Christian. Why do you apologize? I can't do that. I'm a Christian. There's no sorry about it. There's no apologizing. I am what I am, and I'm proud of it. I could not be politically. I could not be a Democrat. I cannot. I can't. Kenny Mars came to Las Vegas when I preached there. Got up the first sermon he preached. He goes, you can't be a Democrat and go to heaven. Okay, I spent the rest of the week putting out fires. Now, let me say the other side of the equation. I cannot be a Republican. I can't. But I'm not going to say you can't be this or you can't be that. I'm just saying that I can't be either one. And then people say, well, what are you? And my answer is I'm confused politically. I truly am. I think I'm pragmatic. I think I'm reasonable. But when it comes to a Christian, I'm never going to apologize. I will not apologize. I am a child of God. See what a great love the Father has for us, that we should be called children of God. That's what John writes in his first epistle. And so every Christian that lives the life of a child of God unapologetically is reflection of a profile in courage. And how wondrous and truly amazing that is. Now, there's a lot more I could talk about, but let's just leave it with Philippians 4 and verse 13. Because in Philippians 4, verse 13, you know already that Paul has challenged the Philippians in so many different ways. But what he says in verse 13 just goes back to the idea of where our courage really comes from. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Now, if you were to look at the second chapter and verse 15, that you may prove yourself to be blameless and innocent, children of God, above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world. It takes courage to be a light in the world. And we live in that way, unapologetically, following after all those other individuals of courage, of conviction. And no, we don't have to be larger than life. We just simply have to go about our work as a child of God with full assurance and full confidence. If you're here this morning and not a child of God, we'd love nothing more than to spend time with you, talk with you about how to become a child of God, how to put on Christ in the waters of baptism, to emerge to walk in newness of life, having then been added by God to the body of his Son. But maybe you've already done that. You need the prayers of the congregation for strength or encouragement. If there's any way we can be of a spiritual service to you, we're going to ask you to come when we stand and sing in just a moment. But for those of you that are on live stream, I do believe that there's going to be a contact slide coming up at the end of everything. On it is my contact information. I know several of you have contacted me recently. I appreciate that. And over the last almost now 2 years, I mean, you start to think of it, we're in October. We're only January when all this started of 2020. So we're coming up on 2 years. And like Dan said, we long for everything to get back to normal. But a lot of you have contacted me, and I appreciate the opportunity to either put you in contact with people where you live to help you, or to long distance help you, or if you live locally, I'll go to where you are or meet you wherever in order to examine God's word or to talk with you. If we can be of any assistance, we'd invite you to reach